My name is Sam Post with Phenomwell. Today we're going to talk about Delta-8 THC. Our good friend Kevin Shankle is here with us. Kevin is founder of Noah Brands and currently with Aces Hemp. Personally, I'm a big fan of Delta-8. It keeps our business afloat and I enjoy using it myself. It seems to help me personally with pain, sleep, and mood. It's a minor cannabinoid. There's not enough of it in any strain of cannabis to extract Delta-8. And some people have concerns that it's synthetic, which it's not. So Kevin, where does Delta-8 THC come from?
So I guess I'd like to kind of start off with, what is Delta-8 THC? So Delta-8 THC is a isomerization of CBD derived from the hemp plant.
Wait,
So,
could you say that word again? What?
Isomerize. Delta-8 THC is an isomer of Delta-9. And basically, an isomer is two or more compounds with the same chemical formula, but a different arrangements of atoms in their molecular structural. I guess to break that down, from a chemical or a structural perspective, Delta-8 THC differs from Delta-9 THC due to the location of a critical chemical bond.
Okay.
Basically, looking at the chemical format, Delta-8 and Delta-9 contains both double bonds in their molecular structure. Pretty much Delta-8 contains that double bond on the 8th carbon chain, and Delta-9, it is contained on the 9th carbon chain. So similar, very similar structure, but completely different on a molecular and components aspect.
Okay. Did you take chemistry? Because I did not.
So with my undergrad, I had a few classes of chemistry. What's interesting about it now is that it all makes sense. Back then, I didn't really care about salt or sodium chloride and all the makeups. But now with this, me really diving into this industry, I've picking chemistry back up.
Well, Mrs. Trexler, may she rest in peace, my 8th grade teacher, science teacher, stayed after school and tried to help me. I still could never balance an equation. But what I'm getting is that they're very, very simple. Delta-8 and Delta-9 THC are almost the same.
Pretty much, just different. The only difference is where the double bond is located in the carbon chain.
Okay. So where does it come from? Like, it's not, there's not enough in it in the plant itself to extract it.
Correct. So I guess just kind of jumping around a little bit, kind of the history of Delta-8 THC. It's not, so Delta-8 THC is a new market phenomenon, but it's something that's been chemistry prevalent for a good while now. So back in 1966, a science by the name of Raphael Mechoulam, which this guy was a Israel organic chemist, and also I think he was a professor at the University of Jerusalem. Ultimately, he found out that at that time in 1966, that if you could convert CBD molecules to Delta-8 THC and also Delta-9 THC molecules. And that's pretty much just by the chemically starting out with a CBD, compound. And ultimately, there's several ways to skin this cat, but it's the cleanest and simplest and purest form of this would be able to start from CBD isolate, which is a true isolated compound of just CBD, and it typically comes in like a crystally or a powder structure. From there, you add, and I could dive into it a little bit deeper, but pretty much you dissolve your CBD isolate in a nonpolar organic solvent. You then add an acid, either a Lewis or a Bronsted acid. You stir that concoction of CBD and acid at 100 degrees Celsius, ranging anywhere from 1 to 18 hours, just depending on exactly which acids or catalysts you use. And then once you stir that for that period of time, you pretty much, after that, you have to dry it with like a neutralizer or pretty much add sodium bicarbonate in it. That at the time creates the last conversion. And from there, you would extract it with like a non-polar solvent and then ultimately test it to make sure you've converted correctly and that there's no Delta-9 in there higher than that 0.3% THC limit that we're all aware of. It's a pretty chemical in-depth process, but ultimately for about $3,000, you could do small batch Delta-8 processing yourself in a safe environment. Of course, you need your hoods for all of your possible exhaustion, making sure that's not, harmful, and always make sure you got your PPP on your, for example, some of these acids, if you were to get a drop of it in your eye, you're blind. So ultimately you got to know what you're doing, but pretty much anyone with a solid chemistry background and understands cannabinoids can pretty much do this themselves.
Well, it sounds pretty chemistry like to me, but I'm guessing it's not synthetic though. That's the concern that some people who come in our store have.
Absolutely. So basically, when you're saying synthetic, that pretty much, on a molecular level refers to it as being synthesized. And ultimately, there's the language in the Farm Bill that specifies, under congressional protection that supersedes this as a classified, controlled substance. So it's pretty chemistry involved, but it can be created fairly easy.
That's what I was curious about. It's got to be easy. I mean, I've read that cannabinoids, many different cannabinoids, can be converted to other cannabinoids, and it's for a chemist, it's not that hard to do. But it's so popular now that a lot of it's being produced. So it must not be that hard, right? I mean, it's not.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think where a lot of people, throws out the is synthesized or is synthetic. Ultimately, just due to the addition of any man-made processes to consolidate, isolate, or derive a chemical doesn't impact whether it's naturally derived. And ultimately, your starting agent, your CBD isolate, is a naturally derived plant byproduct.
And okay, Delta-9 degrades into Delta-8, correct?
Yes and no. So ultimately, I think is what you're kind of getting at. Delta-8 THC is a lot more stable than Delta-9 THC. So for example, Delta-9 THC over a period of time and some possible environmental factors, it can convert to CBN pretty quickly. Whereas the Delta-8 is a much more stable cannabinoid, hence that where that double bond is on the carbon chain. And ultimately, it's got a longer shelf life. So a lot of the benefits from Delta THC are greater than Delta-9 THC, not just from a consumer standpoint, but from a manufacturing standpoint, a molecular standpoint. Now, on paper, and to the most effects of the body in the endocannabinoid system, Delta-8 on paper is about half as potent as Delta-9 THC. I can personally tell you for a fact I cannot handle Delta-8 THC the way I handle Delta-9. My body does not respond to it well. Very low doses for me.
Okay, so your experience is that it's not half as strong.
So ultimately, and it's all pretty much how we, metabolize, how our body metabolizes these cannabinoids. But from my personal experience, Delta-8 THC is stronger than any Delta-9 I've had in my previous experiences. But chemically and on paper, it is 50% the potency of the psychoactive side of it than Delta-9.
So really, all of these cannabinoids, CBD, Delta-9, Delta-8, any of them, CBG, CBN, they're all different. People respond different ways. It's impossible to promise this is going to affect everybody like that, right?
You're exactly right. And that's kind of one of the hard things to really nail down the true benefits, because a lot of individuals have multiple benefits that the individual beside them may not, affect, or vice versa. But I think as the science progresses and the system scans that's coming available, I think that'll work itself out in the near future.
See, I was thinking of it like CBD does not degrade into Delta-8 the way Delta-9 degrade. I think of like, okay, I've got this pile of wood, and then termites get to it, and eventually it turns into a big pile of dirt, right? So it degrades.
Yeah, so I would really pretty much replace that word degrades with converts.
Okay.
And then if you value CBN higher than Delta-9 THC, it's not really degrading from that standpoint. It's more converting. For example, there's some of the THCP, as in poly, is a new cannabinoid people are really starting to kind of dive into. And ultimately, they found out that THCP, it's only stable for 30 to 40 minutes before it wants to convert to something else. So ultimately, I wouldn't really call it degrading. I would call it more of a converting at that molecular level. Now, CBD, so let's say, for instance, you've got smokable flower, you've got it drying, hanging, and curing. You could do some things in that process to degrade the CBD cannabinoid, but that's more of a different standpoint than converting, while it's in a distillate format.
Now, what was that thing you said a minute ago? THCP? Is that what you said?
THCP, yes, that's correct, Sam. So the cases now for THCP, and not getting too off subject here, they're claiming in some instances 30x stronger than Delta-9 THC. With there being so many cannabinoids that now these scientists are able to explore and derive and convert chemically, that they're on these things pretty quickly. I do believe, Delta-8 is not a fad. I believe it's a cannabinoid that'll be here to stay. And ultimately, with the 2018 Farm Bill, it's deemed legal, as long as the Delta-9 content is below that 0.3%. So I think it's going to be a good one to stay.
That's interesting. Because and I wanted to ask you about Delta-10. Remind me to ask you about that. I read something about Delta-10, but while we're on that, do you think the states most of the states are legal now? Are they using Delta-8 too, or is this just a workaround for places like North Carolina?
No, so a lot of your, in my experience, a lot of your rec states are really catching on, or rec and medicinal states are really catching on to the Delta-8. For example, out west, if you go into a typical dispensary, you've got to have a medical card, or pretty much a host of things to even allow you to purchase a product of that similar fashion. Where Delta-8 THC, it is illegal in 11 states, but in those states that it's legal, no medical card is required. None of those healthcare prerequisites do you need to allow you to purchase Delta-8 THC. So that also means it can be found in your vape shops, your alternative healthcare spaces. Not just a driven or a traditional dispensary. So ultimately, Delta-8 THC is a lot more available for a national consumer base.
Oh, got it. Got it. Yeah, so there would be some appeal to that. Not even in Seattle, I wouldn't have to go to a dispensary to get that.
Yeah, it was when I was doing a little bit of my homework, kind of really preparing myself for this. One thing that I thought was interesting that I just like to share, Delta-8 THC is illegal in 11 states. And I think out of one of those states, we're really going to be surprised, or needless to say, I was. So Delta-8 is illegal in Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, Delaware, Idaho, Iowa, Mississippi, Montana, Rhode Island, and Utah. But I found that very interesting that it is illegal. Now, this was this past year. I think some things have changed on this list for 2021, but I thought it was very interesting that Colorado deemed it illegal at this time.
Very interesting.
And I think, to be honest with you, I don't really dive into politicals and all those things, but I think Colorado, from more of a standpoint of, was afraid of. This is just a personal opinion of mine. Could possibly be afraid of some of those lost sales of the Delta-9, but that's just completely guessing from the hip. But I did find it interesting that 11 of the states, Delta-8 THC is deemed illegal. Just a fun fact there for you.
Yeah, I was curious about that. I saw that too. And I actually asked somebody in Colorado because we get a lot of product from Colorado, our chocolate. And they sell it's coming from there and it's Delta-8, but I guess they can't sell it there.
Yeah, so it kind of, from what I understand, just diving into it, just very shallow. It's similar to the extractor's license in North Carolina. If you have your extraction license or processing capabilities, you can process it. You just can't sell it within that state. Now, where Delta-9 THC, you can have interstate trade, which allows them to sell, from state to state. But I can tell you personally, a lot of Delta-8 THC distillate is being produced in Colorado.
In a minute, we will talk with Kevin about the effects offered to people from Delta-8 THC.
Hello, Brooks here with the Books with Brooks monthly book club podcast. We read one book a month and then we talk about it. Books like Stephen King's The Shining or Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. If you're on the hunt for book recommendations and enjoy sparkling conversation, come read along with us and then listen in.
Kevin, what are some of the effects that make this so popular for people?
Yeah, and I think you covered the three big ones, right when you started this. And ultimately that's, chronic pain. I've seen great improvements upon sleep, and then ultimately mood. We have been manufacturing Delta-8 products for a good bit now. We've got some very good data, a lot of great customer feedback. In your chronic pain patients, we've gotten a lot of great pain relief from that. We've had claims where individuals couldn't lift their hand above their shoulder, and then before they know it, they're cooking supper and reaching up in the cabinets. We've got a lot of that type of situations. Sleep. My mother is a big fan of the Delta-8 THC products. We've tried a host of cannabinoid cocktails on her. She responds very well to Delta-8, and a 30 to 60 milligram dose for her will pretty much give her a night's sleep. And that's something that I got to be careful not getting emotional talking about, but really seeing how this has affected my mother in a positive way has really kept me driving into this market to really make that impact. And mood, for example, we were at a trade show a couple of weeks ago. Ladies over there just pretty much hating life, had a bad day at that moment. Maybe hating life was a little harsh, but ultimately having a bad day out there unloading in the rain. She comes over there. Hey, I'm having a bad day. We give her a package of gummies, make a long story short. All of our friends come over there, the remaining of the convention, saying that how great of a mood their friend was in, and they had to experience that because she hadn't acted like that in a while. So mood, once again, it affects you in multiple ways. One thing I'd really like to pound on also from this data, I've been in pretty straight dialogue with a lot of the customers that I know on a personal level. To date, all of them have passed a traditional drug screen test for Delta-9 THC. I know there's a lot of back and forth. Do you pass a drug test? Do you not? In every instance I've seen historical to date with our products, we have seen 100% success rate on a traditional marijuana screening.
Wow. Well, I got to be responsible. I tell everybody that they will test positive because it is THC. So I've never heard that before. It's interesting, but I got to be careful. I don't want
and absolutely, Sam. And I think more of your position as a retail, I commend that, to be honest. For example, too, another thing, to make sure you're abiding all your local and state packaging laws. I'm almost certain, but I think Georgia requires you to actually state on the package that you may fail a drug test. Don't quote me to that, but as we were earlier on screening a lot of our competitors' products, we pulled them from a lot of different places, and I seen that on some of the packaging. But ultimately, I would say until this is really proven out that ultimately, if you've got to pass a traditional drug test, I would definitely be careful.
Yeah, there are two things I warn people about is that, of course, and then with edibles, not to take too much, like to really give it time, because it seems to take 2 or 3 hours. And I take it most evenings, and it does. I notice my mood is elevated maybe a little bit, and I seem to be very productive when I take it. I can like, hey, if I need to revamp a website, I feel like doing it. And I mean, so I really like it myself. Actually,
And Sam, just out of curiosity, what milligram are you taking?
usually, well, all we've got in our store pretty much is 25. We have some 50s. I've never tried that, so I've taken
Gotcha.
10 and 25. You know,
Gotcha.
and then in the edibles, and then also tinctures, I guess about 15 maybe.
Good stuff.
Here, I want to ask you about flour. We sell Delta-8 infused hemp flour, like hemp flour infused with Delta-8 distillate. We get it from you. Our customers love it, but I've always wondered, how do you infuse a leaf? You can't infuse a leaf. So what exactly is that?
So, you know, infused, there's several different ways you can infuse. I hate using the word spray. You hear that a lot as well. That just sounds bad in my opinion. But ultimately, this product, comes in a distillate format, which is pretty much a very plastic texture. So a lot of the times, first of all, you have to pretty much prep your distillate to be able to apply it to the hemp. A lot of people will also terp infuse their distillate. So if they want that little extra taste or extra smell, they'll infuse their distillate with the terpenes before it's infused in the flour. But for example, we typically infuse flour in 5 to 10 batch run cycles. So that consists of a formulation that we have derived that ultimately our infused flour will always come out at that 50 milligram per gram dosage. So we start out with a very pure, high quality Delta-8 THC distillate. I've worked on a formula for about the past, 6 to 8 months that we've really dialed in to where we do mix a plant-derived terpene in the distillate to bring that viscosity down in the consistency of the distillate. And from there, it is pretty much applied in a spray format or vacuum chamber that draws the distillate through the flour. So you're pretty much taking this distillate oil and infusing it, embedding it, pulling it through a vacuum, spraying it in the controlled environment to apply that distillate to the hemp flour.
Okay, so it's in a vacuum.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Another one I real quickly I'd like to share that I've been seeing a lot of research and in the stages of some small R&D batch plots here at NOAA. But I've seen some gentlemen now that will actually freeze the Delta-8 THC on a real thin layer, freeze it to almost like an ice consistency, shatter that, and actually pull that shattered distillate through a vacuum chamber, infusing it on the flour. But yes, to answer your question, it can either be performed in some type of tumbling, enclosed environment, or a typical vacuum box, Plexan, whatever that would look like. Sam, I'd love to have you down back to the facility to kind of really give you a eyes-on tour of how we do that. You're more than welcome anytime. I'd love to share it with you.
I'd be interested. I didn't see that part, when I was there.
No.
So hey, I guess we need to wrap it up in a minute. Let me ask you just a couple other things real quick here. What people toss around the terms indica and sativa, and I'm like, well, I don't know if that applies. I don't think that really applies here. And yet some products are sort of labeled that way. Is that marketing pretty much?
Yes and no. So, your flower, that your base flower that you start out with, can either be classified or as a sativa or indica. So that could be some inclination of the product actual itself. And then going back to the second way I could see where that's derived, when you're adding, if you choose to add terpenes to your distillate, once again, these terpenes are plant driven. So if it's a cannabis driven terpene, that terpene could have a indica property or sativa property. So there's another way to add that effect to this process. But ultimately, the majority of your hemp products in a flower format will be a indica dominant, a sativa dominant, and or hybrid of the two.
Got it. Thank you. So last question here, and we'll wrap it up. Although I know there's a lot more we could talk about, but what are some of the different products that are most popular?
So Delta-8, you see a lot of your vaporizer cartridges. Those are very popular. They've kind of been seeing the die off a little bit, along with some of these new legislations that's coming out. A lot of these groups, can't produce heavy metals, for the cart. Us as a company, we produced COAs on the empty cart, COAs on the distillate, and also heavy metals test, in the cart. So vaporizer carts are one.
And just for people, if they don't know, COA is certificate of authorization, right?
Yeah, certificate of analysis.
Analysis.
Yes.
There we go.
And pretty much that paperwork, with a proven lab, will give you a multitude of items that can be studied from this. But pretty much it is a cannabinoid content profile of your product.
Okay, I didn't know that it was analysis. That makes me sound like a dumbass. You realize that?
Hey Sam, this is all new. It's
well, but
one thing too that a lot of people say is C of A's. I particularly myself say COA. A lot of people you'll hear refer to it as a C of A, which is still a certificate of analysis.
Well, I hand them out all the time, every day, and I don't know what COA means. So Kevin, what else? What other products? You got your vapes?
Vapes, a lot of, the edibles market is really exploding. Gummies, I would say, is probably your number one. Any type of edible, your Rice Krispie treats, your Nerd Ropes, the list goes on from the edibles. As a company, we produce Delta-8 gummies, Delta-8 taffies, Delta-8 fudge, whether it be peanut butter, chocolate, coconut, strawberry, pretty much anything with a edible format can be produced. You'll have a lot of gel tabs. Delta-8 gel tabs is on the market. The products are expanding rapidly. I've seen here recently, I've seen Delta-8 infused toothpicks, and that's no joke.
Really? Okay. Very, very great. Kevin, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Anything big we're missing before we call it a day here?
Real quick, one thing you mentioned earlier, Delta-10 THC. So once again, isomer of Delta-9, pretty much going back to the carbon chain location. And Delta-10, the double bond is found on the 10th carbon chain. So 8th carbon chain, 9th carbon chain, 10th carbon chain.
So we might one day soon be hearing about Delta-10, you think?
Yes, we're in R&D stages of it now. We have found a very quality supplier of Delta-10 distillate, and we're working on formulations now to pretty much produce your Delta-10 flower, your Delta-10 carts, gummies, etc.
All right. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for being here with us and helping us learn about Delta-8 THC.
It's always a pleasure, guys. It keeps me on my feet. I love this stuff.
Well, thank you. So be sure to visit. And by the way, Kevin is with Aces Hemp, and they sell Delta-8 THC fudge, which I think we need to talk about having that in our store. So be sure to visit phenomwellcbd.com for quality CBD and Delta-8 THC products. You can visit our store if you live in Salisbury, North Carolina, or order online with free shipping and free delivery in Rowan County. And you can join our Chillax Club and use the code CHILL for 15% off. Phenomenal is produced by Mo Barrow and is part of the Press Play Podcast Network, which empowers hosts to create high-quality podcasts that inspire and entertain. For more information, email content@pressplaypodcasts.com.